The magic of state security, how the KGB used psychics and sorcerers, as is well known. Soviet ideology was based on Marxism, which categorically rejected not only religion but, along with it, any superstition and occultism. Against this backdrop, it is even surprising how the USSR's main security service could become almost a world champion in the study of all kinds of devilry. Or was it simply that, for the sake of the victory of communism, materialist Bolsheviks were not afraid to enlist even otherworldly forces? Be that as it may, in December 1924, a neuroenergetics laboratory for the study of parapsychological phenomena appeared within the OGPU. It operated under a special department headed by Gleb Boki, one of the founders of the Cheka. From a young age, Boki was fascinated by esotericism and therefore immediately believed the occultist and hypnotist Alexander Barchenko, who had written an article about the transmission of thoughts over a distance. Barchenko's presentation before the OGPU board proved so captivating that he was appointed head of the neuroenergetics laboratory and given a budget and staff. That all this was no joke is evidenced by the following fact. Boki supported Barchenko's idea of organizing an expedition to Tibet in search of the legendary Shambhala. Skeptics, however, offer another explanation, namely that esotericism interested Boki only as a cover. In reality, the experienced Chekist realized that numerous occult circles were the main meeting places of the intelligentsia, the nobility, and former officers. Therefore, by infiltrating them, it would be possible to learn what the enemies of Soviet power were up to. Looking ahead, it must be said that there was some sense in this approach. Very soon it became known that a mystical club led by the engineer Tchaikovsky was operating in Moscow. The club's members were trying, by means of spells, to inflict a fatal illness on Stalin. They would throw cloaks over their shoulders, put on strange headgear, and sit around a table. At the center of the table stood a skillfully molded wax bust of Stalin himself. The head of the bust was covered with hair belonging to the original. It was bought for insane sums from Stalin's barber, recalled biophysicist Alexander Chizevsky. As a result, the Lubyanka learned that someone was trying to cast a curse on the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, and the black magicians working over the bust were arrested. True, the story ended comically. At night, Chekists who had set up an ambush at Tchaikovsky's apartment suddenly heard a sepulchral creak, soft footsteps, and then saw a black figure. With shouts they fled from the cursed apartment. As it turned out, during the arrest one of the conspirators had quietly hidden in a wardrobe, where he sat for several hours. A battle mage against tanks. What really happened remains unknown. In 1937, Boki was arrested and shot. Barchenko was executed soon after. After that, the topic of magic at the Lubyanka was not raised for many years. Nowadays, sensations sometimes appear claiming that a mysterious performer and hypnotist, Wolf Messing, allegedly worked for the NKVD and even demonstrated his amazing abilities personally to Stalin. However, Archival records of visitors to the Kremlin contain no evidence that Messing ever visited the leader even once. It is said that interest in extrasensory perception was revived by Nikita Khrushchev. Allegedly, during a visit to India, the impulsive general secretary saw yogis who could stand on nails and stop their own hearts. Deciding that with such abilities the Soviet Army and the KGB would gain unprecedented power, Khrushchev ordered the secrets of the yogis to be studied. As a result, in 1961, the Institute for Problems of Information Transmission was created, where, among other things, Soviet psychics were studied. The institute was part of the Academy of Sciences, but as the authors of the book Psi Wars West and East write, all the work was supervised directly by the KGB. The Chekists themselves were simply embarrassed to publicize an interest in mysticism. Flirting with devilry did not fit the agency's strict image, but leaving the occult sphere unattended was also dangerous. At the same time, the CIA launched the secret Stargate program to study the possibilities of using psychics and sorcerers for intelligence purposes. Naturally, the Lubyanka could not fail to respond. Major General of the KGB Nikolai Sham, who headed the direction dealing with extrasensory perception within the agency, later spoke about how cooperation between the KGB and Soviet psychics took place. My interest in these issues took shape in the second half of the 1970s, the general recalled. Once at a party with friends, I met Yuri Vladimirovich Noskov, an engineer in computer technology. He talked about his extrasensory abilities and demonstrated them by accurately identifying the medical problems of the people present. He also had powerful healing abilities. With passes of his hands, he relieved pain and heart attacks and treated many illnesses. I introduced him to Valentin Petrovich Glushko, head of the Energia Scientific Production Association and chief designer of spacecraft. Glushko hired him, and Noskov began working on diagnostics there, monitoring the health of employees. The results were so impressive that Glushko began to think about using such extrasensory energies for defense purposes and decided to create a special laboratory to develop a qualitatively new space weapon. The idea was to launch special generators into space to amplify extrasensory energies and use them to influence specific areas on Earth. However, as Sham the plan did not go forward. Next, the Chekists found another psychic, engineer Alexander Dev. The KGB received information that a certain inventor had constructed a glass sphere containing an amount of energy capable of destroying Moscow. During a search of the laboratory, no such sphere was found, but Dev was decided to be tested. According to General Sham, the engineer studied poltergeist phenomena and certain weak fields that were not detected by instruments. As a result, during a field experiment, Dev allegedly managed to stall the engines of a tank battalion. Another subject of study was Valery Kustov from Rostov-on-Don. In 1981, the chief designer of the Design Bureau of Automatic Systems, Igor Bereznoy, was murdered. An unknown person handed him a homemade bomb disguised as a box of medicines. Since the Bureau was engaged in the creation of laser weapons, The KGB took up the search for the killer. While the Chekists were digging everywhere for clues, another emergency occurred. In Moscow, the chief engineer of the Astrophysics Research and Production Association, where laser-related developments were also underway, was found murdered. Eventually, the idea arose that some foreign intelligence service was deliberately eliminating Soviet scientists. Nevertheless, time passed and no leads appeared. Colleagues from the Rostov KGB Directorate advised the Lubyanka to turn to Kustov. According to them, he could see through anyone and unravel any secret. As Nikolai Sham recounted, he personally met with Kustov and tested his abilities on himself. The psychic demonstrated a certain energy flow coming from his hands. Kustov began working on solving these crimes. Sham recalled, "We were prepared for anything, from the actions of foreign intelligence services to internal terrorist conspiracies in the spirit of Stalinist paranoia." However, Kustov said that he saw nothing of the sort. In his opinion, both crimes were domestic in nature. We did not believe him, and the crimes were never solved. A few years later, I met one of Bereznoy's friends and told him about our fiasco. He was astonished. "You didn't find out who the killer was." "In our design bureau, it was no secret at all. Everything was extremely simple jealousy. Psychics were consulted not only at the Lubyanka. For example, Azerbaijani Chekists enlisted Tofik Dadashov to take part in a combat operation. From the late 1960s, he toured cities of the Union demonstrating psychological experiments and was considered almost a sorcerer. In March 1989, a certain Stanislav Skok hijacked a Tu-134 aircraft flying from Voronezh. Skok announced that he had a bomb and would detonate it unless he was paid $500,000. At the same time, he claimed that he had accomplices among the hostages on board, and therefore any attempt to storm the plane would still result in the bomb being exploded. Officers of the local KGB asked Dadashov to clarify the situation. Disguised as a foreign ministry employee, the psychic approached the plane and spoke with the terrorist. After that, he informed the assault group that Skok had neither a bomb nor accomplices and was bluffing. As a result, fighters of the Alpha Group successfully carried out the assault and freed the passengers. For this, the psychic was awarded an honorary certificate of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the Azerbaijan SSR. In addition, as Dadashev himself recounted, he was involved in work identifying foreign intelligence agents. In particular, at the request of the KGB, he cracked an English spy at first sight who was trying to check into the Rossiya Hotel under the guise of an ordinary tourist. "I twist and turn, trying to deceive? Amazing, isn't it? And what is most striking is not so much the incredible abilities of psychics capable of exposing enemy agents and stopping tanks, as another question: why were all these completely unique qualities not used to their full extent? Or perhaps they did not exist at all." The authors of the book casually mention Yuri Noskov. Although he personally monitored Glushko's health, the designer still died. In turn, engineer Dev swore he would cure 2 KGB employees who developed cancer after participating in the liquidation of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident, but they died. As for Tofik Dedashev, Alpha officers confirm that he did indeed speak with the terrorist, but nothing is said about his key role in the operation. Another stone in the basket in 2009, Dadashev, at the request of an Arguments and Facts journalist, issued a forecast for the near future. According to the medium, the nuclear missile threat from North Korea was about to disappear because North Korea would allegedly abandon socialism and follow the development path of all former socialist bloc states. And the final of the 2010 World Cup would feature an African team facing the strongest team from South America. As is known, the finalists of that World Cup were Spain and the Netherlands, and Kim Jong-un still threatens the United States with missiles. So clearly something does not add up. Nevertheless, there is nothing strange in the fact that special services pay attention to sorcerers and occultists. On the contrary, that is how it should be. For no matter how developed science is, there are still things it cannot fully explain. Better safe than sorry. The problem is that this requires a critical approach and extreme caution in decision-making. Alice, at times these qualities seem to give way to ordinary human greed and careerism. A byword among professionals in the security services became the notorious Military Unit 1003, also known as the Directorate for the Study and Development of Extraordinary Human Abilities. It was formed in 1987 as part of the USSR Ministry of Defense, although, as Nikolai Sham admitted, this was only a cover. The unit was actually overseen by the KGB. The task of the directorate was to study the use of psychics' abilities for defense purposes. If one believes the words of the directorate's head, Alexei Savin, he and his subordinates mastered combat magic no worse than Gandalf. In particular, a method was developed for remote monitoring of the condition of nuclear facilities. Mediums could determine from a distance whether everything was in order. They learned to determine the exact coordinates of American submarines and the health status of each crew member. They could determine the technical condition of any type of U.S. military equipment from photographs. During the fighting in Chechnya, they located minefields. They established telepathic communication over thousands of kilometers. They discovered that reincarnation exists, and once they even saved the Earth from an alien invasion by determining that a UFO with extraterrestrials was approaching our planet and convincing the command to turn off air defense systems. In short, a circus and nothing more. Yet Military Unit 1003 existed until 2003, until it was finally disbanded by presidential decree. Savin himself claimed that the reason was the intrigues of envious and narrow-minded slanderers who did not believe in superhuman abilities, although perhaps another version is closer to the truth. Judging by the memoirs of the chief psychic of the Army, the Directorate, which grew to 50 people, essentially resembled a sinecure. Even in the hungry 1990s, it had an annual budget of $4 million and a protected budget line. It reported only to the Chief of the General Staff. No one else could even inquire what exactly the battle mages were doing. At the same time, ranks and positions flowed freely. Savin himself received a service apartment in the very center of Moscow, and the rank of lieutenant general with all the privileges that entailed. One might ask, if such sorcerers worked in the directorate, why did they not foresee the sinking of the Kursk, the bombings of apartment buildings in Moscow and Volgodonsk? How can one not recall the old joke, if psychics really exist, why have we never once seen newspaper headlines reading, "Famous seer wins the lottery jackpot"? By the way, as an example of the KGB's use of psychics, the following case is often cited. In 1978, a match for the World Chess Championship took place in Baguio between Soviet Grandmaster Anatoly Karpov and Viktor Korchnoi, a defector representing Switzerland. Korchnoi's victory, having recently demonstratively requested political asylum abroad, was extremely undesirable for Moscow. Therefore, extreme measures were taken. As Anatoly Karpov recounted, in Moscow it became known that Korchnoi had enlisted a psychologist on his team. As a result, along with Karpov and the accompanying KGB officers, Colonel of the Military Medical Academy Vladimir Zukar traveled to Baguio. An astonishing subject appeared in the hall. Viktor Korchnoi later wrote in his memoirs, "He sat in one of the front rows, staring intently at me, trying in every way to attract my attention. His connection with Karpov was also indisputable. In general, he sat motionless in one place for all 5 hours. His endurance could be envied by a robot. But at moments when it was Karpov's turn to move, he simply turned to stone." One could feel the colossal work of thought in this man. Korchnoi's representatives insisted that the strange spectator be removed from the hall, but since he was doing nothing illegal, the demand was not satisfied. He was only moved farther away from the stage. Was Zukar a psychic telepath? Unlikely. It was more likely a provocation. All chess players knew that Korchnoi was an extremely suspicious person. Therefore, Zukar's fixed gaze and the rumor spread that Karpov had brought along a telepath capable of inducing an incorrect move irritated Korchnoi. At the same time, Karpov probably felt better knowing that a hypnotist was sitting in the hall. Just look at the statistics in Zukar's presence. Karpov won 5 games, whereas in his absence the score was 4-1 in Korchnoi's favor.